Welcome to the Republican Professor. Today we have with us, for the second time, Rich Bordner.
Good day to you, sir.
Good day to you. Good to see you again.
Right back at you. Yea, verily, amen.
It's been a year, I think.
Something like that. I think maybe more.
And you are still a teacher, K through 12,
Somehow.
public school.
Yeah, public school.
What are you teaching this semester?
So they for some reason gave me a few more classes since last time. So last time,
Is that legal? Don't you have a contract that says
uh,
you can only have?
I'm fine with it.
Really?
Yeah, makes things interesting. I mean, part of it's difficult. I'll get into the details in a little bit. Part of it's difficult, but uh, I don't mind the classes they've given me. So last time we talked, I taught and still teach honors English for seniors. I teach what's called on level English for seniors. That's like regular English. And then they call it World of Ideas, which is a philosophy class. And then since then, they gave me Bible Lit. So I teach the Bible as literature.
No way.
And then I teach a class called Intro to TV and Radio. So that's fun. Yeah, I don't know much about TV and radio, so I've had to kind of teach myself as I'm teaching the class. But it's a fun class. I really like the kids there, and I like the subject matter. It's
Wow.
interesting and engaging. So, yeah, they just keep asking me if I want to take this elective, want to teach this elective. I was all right, sure, I'll do it.
How many classes are you teaching?
5 total, like different classes. So, like,
I see what you're saying.
I have two honors English periods, 2 on-level English periods, and then my philosophy class. Then this semester I've got my TV and radio class, and then last semester instead of TV and radio I had my Bible Lit class. So 4, but if you look at the whole year, it's 5 different subject matters. Yeah, 5 different curriculums.
How do you approach the Bible class?
Well, I'm very much restricted in what I can teach by the district. So it's kind of weird. They only let me teach the Old Testament and only certain stories in the Old Testament. So I'm not supposed
wow.
to go. I'm not supposed to go outside
Micromanaging, huh?
Yeah. But you know what? It's still the Bible. And anytime you can teach that, whether it's as Word of God or whether it's as literature in a public school class, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that pitch.
Hold on, I'm going to pause this for a sec. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. So I have new headphones now. You were saying about Bible as literature that you can't teach certain Bible stories.
Yeah, I'm not supposed to teach New Testament. I mean, it's kind of hard to teach the Old Testament without the New Testament. So, still do some of that, but I'm not supposed to.
Do they pick and choose what you can teach out of the Old Testament?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And based on what?
I don't know. It's a good question. There was just a curriculum that was made at the district level, 11 years ago. And it's kind of weird. Like they didn't really go by that curriculum until I started teaching the class. So I don't know, maybe my reputation preceded me and they're like, man, this Bordner guy, we gotta put a leash on him.
Now,
I don't know.
Are they clear about what you can't teach? Or
well, they just said
the rest is up to you, or what?
No, they just said that whatever's in this curriculum, you can. Anything outside of it, you can't. Pretty much.
So, of course, you start with the sin of homosexuality.
Oh, yes. No.
Yeah, we're going to start with that. Any questions so far? Okay. No? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, but like I was saying earlier, it's still a good opportunity. Anytime.
Yeah, of course.
You can teach the Bible, even if it's
sure
as literature, I mean, look, um, whether it's the Word of God or literature, my approach is in teaching is pretty much the same. There's the text, the authority is the text, and our goal is to understand what the text says
Sure.
and apply it to everyday life, just like you would any other literature. Like
Yeah.
some people might balk at that and be like, well, you're being religious. No, I'm just reading it and treating it like I would any other piece of literature. That's what you do in English class. You read it, you comprehend it, and then you say, why does it matter? So what? How should we then live as a result of what Shakespeare has taught us through Macbeth? And I approach the Bible in the same way. And it's just,
Right.
the basic rules of hermeneutics 101, reading
Except for
comprehension.
except for that they're not cutting up Macbeth and telling you what part you can teach and what part you can't teach.
That is correct. But
The Grapes of
within that
Wrath.
range,
Don't read the last chapter because it's got a breast in it.
within that range, of what I'm supposed to teach, there's still a lot of opportunity. So,
That's true.
when they,
Yeah,
when they ask
that's
me,
probably the best way to handle it.
yeah, when they asked me if I wanted to teach the class, I jumped at it. Of course I
Yeah,
did.
there's no sense in throwing a fit, and I love that you have the positive attitude because you're just making the best of what you have, and actually, that's pretty good. If you can teach
Mhm.
any of the Bible. Now, do they tell you how to teach it, or is that up to you?
I
They
mean,
tell
there's
you
there's
what
less,
you can teach, but do they? Okay, they're the
there's
lesson
lessons,
plans.
there's a
Okay,
curriculum, but look,
okay,
a teacher has a certain amount of leeway
right,
in their class.
yeah,
There's a curriculum lesson that you get from on high, but of course, any teacher, any class, whether it's English, history, or Bible lit, you're going to react to what you've got situation on the ground. So you can't just be a slave to the lesson and do that and only that and not get outside of that. That's absurd. No English teacher worth their salt teaches that way in their own English class. So I'm going to approach it with the same philosophy. I'm not going to approach this class any different from any sort of English class. So if I, sense that this lesson's not working, it's not engaging the kids, and it's hitting them sideways, I'm going to adjust, and so I do. And
yeah,
that's like no administrator should have any sort of problem with that because that's what is done every day in every single class, no matter
right,
what the subject.
yeah,
You've got you as a teacher, you've got a certain amount of authority to teach as you professionally see fit. That doesn't mean that I'm, you know, getting religious and doing some sort of sermon and like taking too much liberty with that. It just means that you know yes, there is a lesson, but I'm not going to like never go outside those bounds.
right. Well, and your power of influence extends beyond the lesson too. I mean, you could encourage the students to read the whole thing and
Yeah, yeah. I
think
mean,
about it and come up with questions.
in in a
You
certain
can point
fashion,
them to you can point them to the whole
right?
thing because the
Right.
whole thing is what got passed down. It's not just part of it.
Right. I mean, it's a unified story.
Sure.
And so to understand,
What translation do you use?
um, I forget what translation it was.
King
I mean, it,
James?
it was no, it wasn't King James. It was a more modern translation, but it was fine. It wasn't like
Yeah.
a bad translation or anything. So, to your point, um, if this story in Book of Genesis is connected to the story of Jesus in the Gospels, to understand the story in Genesis adequately, you kind of have to go there. You have to talk about it again, just like you would any other literature in English class. If this Shakespeare play is, if it's connected in some thematic way with this other play that he wrote earlier or later, you have to connect the two if you're going to do your job as an English teacher, if you're going to give them an adequate understanding of what they're reading. So,
Well, the
yeah,
analogy would be um not to Shakespeare, two things in Shakespeare. The analogy would be um with trying to understand Shakespeare was something that was written much later.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah, I mean,
most people would approach the Old Testament as clarifying the New Testament, um, because of the chronological order. Because obviously the Old Testament had to have been comprehensible before the New Testament.
yeah, but I think there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship too in terms of interpretation.
Yeah,
There is that because of chronology, but also the New Testament helps you understand and illuminate the Old. It helps you give
right.
texture and meaning to that Old Testament story. So,
Do you know what that's called?
nope.
Well, I don't want to sound like Mr. Fancy Pants over here, which I guess is what I'm doing, but it's called canon criticism.
Huh?
And
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
there's a guy, it actually would be helpful for what you're doing because you could point to him because he's a Yale professor. Well, he's dead now, but his name was Brevard Childs.
Reverend Childs.
Brevard
Okay.
Childs. He's the and I hope I'm not totally yeah, I mean, I got my first master's in biblical interpretation. So canon criticism, Brevard Childs, and he has some students that like Christopher Seitz,
Mhm.
is a guy Seitz. Well, these are he I mean I don't think he's the first to articulate it. I'm not saying that, but he's a guy that developed at a high level of academic literary criticism talk and scholarship at Yale. He developed some people would say it's an excuse or whatever, a reason to read the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. And he just called it canon criticism because he said uh, that the whole thing is what is passed down to us. And so if you read it like a whole, the whole Bible, then it can help you understand the New Testament can help you understand the Old Testament. And he said it in like some fancy pants ways, that you could use in your as an excuse to to do that. And
Well,
actually, he's really good. He's really good. So
it
he's a
wouldn't
good
be an
commentator.
excuse. It wouldn't be an
Yeah.
excuse. It would be
Well,
true. There's a unified storyline that starts in Genesis and ends in Revelation. And
I
cutting
agree with
off,
you.
if you're
I
cutting
agree.
off half of it,
Sure.
you're stopping the story before you
Yeah.
even get to the climax. In what sense is
Right.
that?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah. But
But anyway, he's a good guy to know. Brevard Childs, he was an Old Testament scholar.
okay, I'll
That
write
was
that
where
down.
he cut his teeth at
Remember
Yale. So
Reverend Childs.
he's legit. I mean, I mean, he reads it in the original languages and he's legit. He's an old school guy, like back before great inflation.
So like a long time back. But the class was this is my first time teaching it this year.
Yeah.
And I did struggle with
Okay.
it. Partly because new class, never taught it before.
Yeah.
Uh,
How many
and
students?
it was like 13, 14, something like that. So a small class, but partly because it was really difficult to engage the students. And I'm not used to that.
Oh, yeah.
Like with my philosophy class, um, like getting them talking, they I don't know if it's because it's kind of a more secular student clientele and they're more confident. That might be the case or what, but with this particular group of students, all of them with one exception, and this one exception was he was a seeker, so he was kind of adjacent. All
And
the other
what's
students,
his name? What's his name and student ID number?
all the other students were, Christians, identified as Christians, leaders on like campus groups, like evangelical groups on campus, came from solid Christian homes, and it was just really difficult to engage them and get them interested.
Hmm.
The conversations, typically petered out really, really quickly, which I'm not used to. I'm used to a lot more interest and energy and engagement. With these guys, it was man, it was hard to get them going sometimes.
Makes me very uncomfortable to hear, but it's
Yeah,
very believable. Now, why do you
Yeah.
think that is? You have some theory about this.
Yeah.
I have a theory about it, and I wasn't even there.
Well, off the top of my head, two things come to mind. One is that maybe a little familiarity breeds contempt, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
That there's could be that going on.
yeah.
And maybe a little bit of an inferiority complex.
Hmm.
Um, and here's what I mean by that. Okay. I've noticed a certain pattern in my classes, whether it's philosophy or English or whatever. The secular progressive students tend to be really, really over the top confident in their beliefs. And the Christian kids, the more conservative minded kids, they tend to be a lot more timid and less willing to speak up. I've had some exceptions, but I can count them on 3 or 4 fingers
Hmm.
throughout the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
Most kids, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know their real position because they just don't talk in class. And so, could there be something going on like that with these kids? Well, maybe. There were a couple times when, they're all Christian kids, so I didn't feel like I was being unprofessional in doing this. I was like, all right, let's deal with some questions you guys have. What questions about the Bible? Like, what are some doubts or some
Right.
issues? Or maybe, somebody in class said this about the Bible or about some religious issue or maybe a philosophical. Anything goes. Any question that you want to talk about that you don't know how to answer. Somebody said this. What should I say? Those sorts of things. Normally, like when I go to a youth group or something, I have no problem getting kids engaged in that sort of talk. But with this
Right.
group, they were really, really resistant to it.
Hmm.
They were like, we never talk about this in class because it's inappropriate. You shouldn't talk about this in public schools. And so we never have questions. And so I don't have questions. And they said that not as like a bad thing. Like, hey, this is kind of a hang up I have. I need to get over this. Yeah, I realized that, this is not good. They said it as like a prideful thing. Like they were proud of never talking about spiritual things with, at all. And so it was just reserved to like,
The secular people were proud.
no,
Did I get
these are
that
Christian
wrong?
kids.
The
These are
Christian
Christian kids.
kids. Okay,
Christian kids.
sorry.
Yeah. So I was asking the Christian kids, like, hey, what are some challenges that you have gotten to your beliefs that you want to talk about? Like, so free reign.
Right.
We're all friends here. I'm here to help. I'm here to help you reason through these questions and find some answers. So what do you want to talk about? And there's like nothing because we don't get challenges. We never talk about it. And they said that again, like it was some sort of um, good thing. Like they were proud of that, and they just didn't want to go there. And so I was like, all right, I guess that was a dud. You know, it was just a really strange vibe, like a really
Can
strange
I,
response I got from them. So
do you feel like they felt like it was an easy A because they know the Bible, or
I mean, maybe,
was
but
it
I
just,
don't think that was the reason why the conversations petered out quickly.
so they just were not curious?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's just intellectual vice on that part.
Hmm.
Is that fostered in the home, you think?
Um, I don't know that with them because I don't want to, judge their home lives without really knowing it. But maybe, yeah. I mean, I think that's a problem writ large in America in general.
Sure.
So, what are the chances? You know, like, okay, here's the way I put
Hmm.
this, Lucas. Um, the suburban and normal everyday America, the suburban hustle kind of takes over. Think about this. They spend 40 hours a week in public school where it's totally secular. God is
Crime.
never brought up. It's never talked about.
Crime.
If God is brought up, it's kind of like as like an emotional hobby that only the emotionally weak need.
Or
But
a
it's
or a
usually
cuss word.
yeah, but it's usually never talked about where they spend the most of their time.
Right.
And then they go from there. And what dominates the rest of their time outside of school? Well, it's social media, it's
It's
soccer
talk tick,
practice, it's yeah,
tic tac.
it's getting into a good college, building their resume so that they can get in whatever college they want. It's those sorts of things. being chauffeured to band practice back and forth. And so spiritual things or fundamental questions, there's just not much room for that in their everyday lives. And so for a lot of students who grow up in Christian homes, their discipleship amounts to church on Sundays, maybe youth group. And then even then, sports and extracurriculars take over to where youth group attendance is probably sporadical. Maybe some prayer at dinner time. But not much more than that. Maybe, the really dedicated families have like a devotion a couple times a week or something like that. But just in terms of number of hours, spiritual things do not take center stage in their thought life very much at all. And so I'm not describing secular kids, I'm describing everybody, even Christian kids who grow up in devout Christian homes. Like a lot of parents kind of offload the discipleship to the church, and there's not much that they do in the home. Maybe they think they do, but if you compare it to what they get in secular programming, it's,
Yeah.
really, really small.
Right.
There's a big asymmetry there. So just the amount of time that they have to think deeply leaves them with anemic intellectual muscles when it comes to the deep questions in life. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions. I'm sure, you're going to get phone calls or emails saying, we do things differently. Great. I'm just talking about the pattern, majority in American life. That's kind of standard,
Right.
And so are these kids in my class, do they fit that standard pattern? I don't know, but maybe, maybe not in some instances, but probably in others. And that leads to just an inability to really get deep,
Right.
That's my theory anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good theory. I think that makes sense. That's sad though. So how effective can the classroom be in counteracting that?
I don't know, man. You've said this before. You kind of just feel like you're just one guy.
Yeah.
I feel the same way sometimes.
I
I
wish I
get
had
this.
sometimes I wish I had schizophrenia so there could be more of us.
I get this, largely coming from my philosophy class. Sometimes, so like my goal in the philosophy class, it's not really to talk them out of their beliefs. It's my goal in the philosophy class is just to slow them down, to thaw their dogmatism.
Cool.
The stereotype is that religious kids are the dogmatic ones.
Yeah.
But it's really everybody.
Right.
Secular kids are just as dogmatic, even more so.
Yeah.
They go with these thought terminating cliches, and that's
Yeah.
all they got.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so my goal is to, get them to maybe slow down a beat or two, drop the slogans,
No
and
kidding.
actually, be able to walk through an issue, focusing on what is true rather than on, affirming somebody's feelings or something like that. So
Yeah.
that's
Or
my goal.
fitting in.
Yeah. And most of the time it's really hard, at least in the moment, for me to see progress on that. A
Yeah.
lot of times students just dig in their heels and they're going to resist.
Hmm.
Sometimes though, every once in a while, I get a win, but then that's drowned out by all of the rest of their programming and influence. That's
Yeah.
overwhelmingly in the other direction. So here's an example. Okay. This is a really good win, but after that, it was drowned out by everything else. So we're talking about morality in the philosophy class, and the question is morality objective or subjective?
Right.
So they watched a debate, they read a couple articles, pro and con. One of the articles defending relativism, another article was rejecting it and defending some sort of moral objectivism. And then we had a couple of days of Socratic dialogue, and one of the kids who was like just dyed in the wool relativist. Morality is subjective. It's all, the slogans. At the end, I kind of, he's like, I said, well, why are you a relativist? Why do you think there is no real like objective morality? What's your argument? He said, well, people disagree about moral issues. One person thinks this and another person thinks that, and that's one of the arguments that's been, advanced in favor of relativism. So I asked him, I said, well, how does it even follow? Just because people disagree, how does that mean that nobody's right? I mean, I challenge you to find one area of life where there's 100% agreement. even in science, there's a flat Earth society, my friend. You'll find disagreement on whether the Earth is spherical or flat. You'll find plenty of people who disagree. You'll find some tribe somewhere in some primitive area of the world that still thinks that, you know, if you sail far enough, you're gonna drop off the edge, right? And he kind of pauses and like he goes, in the middle of the conversation, he said, "I've never thought of that before, man. I've got to rethink what I believe."
Hmm.
Like right there. So that was a big win, right? That's thawing the dogmatism. That's getting a kid to
Sure.
slow down and chill
Sure.
out and
Yep.
think for a beat. But he leaves the classroom and everything else that's influencing him is in the relativistic direction and in the, you know, individualistic direction. And so ever since then, he's like gone relativistic even harder, you know? So sometimes I look at things like that and I'm like, dang, man, like, what am I doing here? But, you know, you keep plugging away and keep showing up the work day after day and trusting that you're not the only one in the process, you know, that you're, that there are other people that God can bring into this student's life to influencing him in a positive direction. And I just trust that I'm one link in the chain, you know.
Yeah.
So even though I can't see progress a lot of times in terms of thawing that dogmatism, I have to hope that my meager efforts are being multiplied by, you know, by the Father.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope anyway. That's my prayer.
Well, I've run into those um, silent classrooms in college, and it's particularly um, difficult emotionally for me. I can't stand it. I just can't stand that these kids are in college and they have nothing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, then you have to really, for me, I have to fall back on being a very good lecturer. And that oftentimes, I mean, in order to start conversations that wouldn't otherwise exist, because um and that can look differently. It's kind of, you have to be careful about sometimes a strong lecture looks differently in different classes. I never use PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
Um but and it does depend on the quality of the student too. I mean, if they're just totally lost, then a good lecture will not do anything. But
Mm-hmm.
and it does depend on the kind of dynamics in the class. It depends on kind of if there's a leader in the class or if there's a, but
Yeah.
if there's not, um, what I've had to rely on is just starting to talk, just
Mm-hmm.
just starting to talk through the issues and until they get their sea legs and they start thinking about it for themselves. And hopefully you can do that. I mean, the best situation is you can reach them
Mm-hmm.
um, with a good lecture or a good set of lectures.
Yeah.
Going through the book and saying, notice this and notice this. And I guess it helps too if you have, like, for me, and I'm saying you, I'm just for me, it helps me if I have quizzes that they might be worried about,
Mm-hmm.
and and I or exams or something like that. But that's at the college level. I wouldn't know exactly how to handle it at the high school level. I've taught high schoolers, but
Yeah.
it's you know, I don't have a the the long experience that you do in the high school.
Well, one of the things that I've learned the hard way in terms of engaging kids in conversation
Mm-hmm.
is if you start out like a whole class conversation where it's you and the whole class in one group, that can be hard for a lot of kids to handle, especially post COVID. And it's doubly hard for them, intimidating for them if you just jump into that like right away.
Hmm.
Um, so
You mean
most
like a
often
lecture, or you mean a discussion?
discussion.
Okay.
So I try to vary vary the venue So sometimes it's, they're in pairs talking, sometimes in groups of threes, sometimes in four or five. Sometimes it's speed dating style, speed dating where you're in two lines and talk with somebody for 3 minutes and then you move to the next person in line. So sometimes it's like that. And students are a lot more willing to engage in those smaller group environments because the stakes are lower. So if I want to do a whole class discussion, usually I'll start out the first several minutes with a smaller group discussion, and I'll give them some prompts to kind of warm them up to get their social juices flowing. And then we'll go into the whole class discussion. And I'll just call on somebody to start out. I got a little wheel that you can find online. You put their names in, you spin the wheel, and it kind of randomly picks somebody. And then it's like, all right, what'd you guys talk about in your small group? And then that kind of gets it going. So things like that have helped me. But almost every time when I just jump into a whole class discussion cold, like, yeah, it flops. It's hard to get them engaged. So that's my class. Hey, Lucas, for some reason I lost you. Can't hear you.
I was on mute. Do you feel
Okay.
like the students read what you tell them to read?
Yeah.
Uh,
At least, I can't say in my English class, but at least in my philosophy class, because I give them some sort of output assignment that day that they have to turn in for a grade. So, for example, right now we're discussing abortion. And 2 days ago, they read Judith Thompson's paper, Defense of Abortion, or, she defends the pro-choice view. And their assignment was to, last 10 minutes of class, however far they got, they had to summarize her argument and then respond to it in 2 to 3 sentences, just like a real quick paragraph. And I can tell from that if they read or not. And I give them a grade on that. And then the next day, it was reading a, response to Thompson's argument and kind of responding to some of the more common pro-choice arguments. And so then the assignment was they had to write like at least 10 comments on the text itself, like where they're writing like a 1 sentence response to what they just read. And so I can read those annotations and I can tell if they're actually reading or not. Maybe they're not reading with an open mind, but at least they're reading. So I normally collect it like we do the reading in class. If there's any reading at home, then it's all bets are off. Like, you might get 25% of the class that does the reading if it's at home. But as long as they're in class and they got to do something with it that day before they leave, you can get a lot higher percentage of kids read.
yeah.
And that's another thing I've learned the hard way. A lot of students struggle with homework,
Right.
putting it lightly. So I've tried to, use the 50 minutes that I have with them every day, like really pack it with a lot of activity.
So you have them read in class. That's part
Yep.
of it. Okay.
Yep.
What other topics do you cover in that besides abortion?
In the philosophy class?
Yeah.
Well, I've structured it as it's not really like a traditional philosophy class. Like in a traditional philosophy class, you're going to read Descartes, you're going to read Kant, you're going to read guys that if I think that if I assigned those, like treated it like a traditional stereotypical philosophy 101 class, I'd maybe have like 2 or 3 kids sign up for it. And so I want to reach, the way I put it is I want to reach the students who are not interested in philosophy. This class is a philosophy class for non-philosophy majors, the students who are not going to go into philosophy in college. So that's background. I structure it as like a controversial issues class.
Yeah.
So the issues that they're going to be exposed to on TikTok, on, Netflix, on social media, maybe some of these topics come up.
Pinterest.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about those issues. And so the questions are timeless, things that we've always been wrestling with, and timely, current. So We start out with a week on the philosophy of mind. So is there a soul, or is it just, we just atoms all the way down? Then we talk about morality. So what is a human being? What is morality? Then we talk about technology. So specifically social media and screens. How has that shaped our lives? How has that made? It's easy to think about how that's made life easier, but we focus on how has that made life more difficult? Like how has it made relationships more superficial? How has
Hmm.
that made dating harder?
Hmm.
We're all weird now when it comes to dating. Like, you can't just like ask somebody out. You got to slide in their DMs, and it's made things super, super weird and crappy when it comes to dating. So we talk about that. Then we talk about we do a little unit on literature. I have them read Brave New World. We talk about all the issues that come out of that novel. And then we
And
go in.
you have them read it in class, or they?
Yes. Yeah, we don't read all of it. We don't read the whole book. We just read 5 or 6 chapters, like some of the more crazy chapters, and then we talk
Mhm.
about it. Then we talk about gender. A lot of issues in gender.
Really?
Abortion is one of those issues.
Hmm.
Then we do a unit on philosophy of religion. So arguments for and against God's existence, arguments about what is faith, things like that. And then we end with a unit on race.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Which race? The mile or the 400 meter or
It's a
the
sprint. It's a sprint, 100 meters.
hurdles?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. Go back to gender. How do you approach that?
So there's a lot of questions underneath that one word that you can talk about. So we talk about um, whether disparities are proof of oppression,
Mhm.
because that's the narrative, right? In terms of gender and race, if you've got a company that's like Google that's 80% men, 20% women, well, that means Google's sexist. And so we kind of poke at that a little bit. Is that true? We examine arguments for and against. And again, it's just thawing their dogmatism, trying to get them to slow down and
Right.
really think through the question. If we have a disparity, does that automatically mean that whatever area that disparity pops up in, that's some sort of oppression in the system? They're used to hearing, like, they all know the arguments for that. And so we look at both sides and we really try to think it through. Some of the other issues are, um, this kind of touches upon what's the good life. What should we prioritize in our lives? Should we prioritize career, or should we prioritize forming a family? Again, they've all had years and years and years of influence telling them that the most important thing is a career. Career, 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 career. You got to get that established. Don't even think about settling down until you're 35. Well, there's a downside. There's a
Yeah.
downside to that. A
Right.
lot of people have bought into that in their 20s, and then especially women, they get in their mid 30s and they're married to the corporation and they have no marriage prospects. And they're, now in this time, they're suddenly starting to connect to the story arc of their life. They're getting older. They're feeling the weight of biology. And now they kind of wake up. It's like, oh, yeah, I do want to have kids,
Mhm.
but it's kind of late in the game. And
Yeah.
so it's harder.
Right.
And plenty of people do land that plane. Plenty of people do, find a partner and get married and have kids at an older age. But a lot of people don't. And they're really, really bitter and they're unhappy. And so I just want to air the question. I'm not trying to prejudice them in one direction or not, but I do want to bring it up. And I do want to um, give them exposure to both sides, not
Yeah.
just one side,
Right.
you know. So we talk about that. We do talk about, pronouns and stuff. So I have them read some people that think, that hold the preferred pronouns view. And then some folks on the other side that say, hey, wait a minute, slow down.
How do you find those materials? And
Um,
are they dictated to you by on
no,
high, or okay?
no, it's not in this class. I just know where to look on the web
Hmm.
and try to find good representatives of both sides. I'm not trying to give them, a Joe Schmo on one side and then a professional on the other. I try to,
Where would you find the pronoun people, and then where would you find the other side
well, I
on the
mean,
web? On the
the
web,
the folks who advance the preferred pronoun view, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's like National Institutes of Health, you
really?
know, any sort. Yeah, that's the one of the articles that I had them read was from the National Institutes of Health, government.
The government.
Sometimes I'll kind of excerpt quotes from scholars, from gender scholars. Like, okay, here's the view. Let's read this.
Yeah.
Take a article from Slate or the Atlantic. They New York
Right.
Times. They got those
Okay.
articles all the time.
Okay. And where do you
Uh,
find the counter to that?
there's some dissident voices out there that
Like a militia in Michigan somewhere?
no. Let's see. So recently, Colin Wright is a biologist who writes a Substack, and he is very skeptical of the standard gender narrative, like a woman is anybody who says they're a woman. And he had a symposium on his Substack of, you know, various views on pronouns. Some people said you got to do it because it's kind and it's respectful. Other people said it's actually kind to not adopt somebody's preferred pronoun. And then there were views in between. And so I had them read several of those shorter articles. Let me just talk about it.
That's
I mean,
interesting.
I'm trying to give, the other side a fighting chance.
Right.
Normally it's just one side, and this is kind of taken as obvious. And how could any smart, sane, kind person doubt this? It's like, well, no, a lot of people of good faith do doubt the narrative. And so we're actually going to talk about it. You're going to examine good arguments from both sides, and then you're really going to think about it. You're not just going to be able to get away with using these thought terminating slogans that shut people up. We're going to think in this conversation.
Hmm.
So that's what we do. That's the goal.
Yeah. And how do they are they on board with the pronoun thing, or do they just not know what to think?
Um, Guys, boys are much more likely to be skeptical than girls are. It's
Hmm.
really rare to find a girl that is anything but all in on the pronouns view. The guys are sometimes a little more hesitant to go along with it wholesale, but they're also really, really hesitant to just like full on air their doubts. Like
And did
you can tell they've got doubts. You can tell that they're skeptical.
Yeah,
They're
right,
not quite on board,
right.
but they're a
So
little timid about it.
where is this pressure coming from in the classroom then? Are they importing it from outside the classroom?
I think so. I
Why
mean,
would
look,
why would they do that? I don't understand that.
we're a social species, and we will typically most people will go to great lengths to avoid being socially shamed. Life, you really never escape the high school lunchroom. You know what I mean by that? The high school lunchroom. You know how you felt when you
But
walked into
why
the lunch.
but why is the lunchroom what's the lunchroom have to do with the pronouns?
I'll get there. Okay,
Okay.
so you know how when you walk into the lunchroom in high school, how you felt when you've got your tray and you're looking at the different tables, and you know that if you sit at this table, like the popular kids table, like they're gonna laugh at you and basically boot you out and kick you out. Like that feeling where you feel
Yeah.
like everybody's looking at you and they're staring at you like, oh my God, look at that kid. What a nerd. Everybody has that feeling sometime, even if it's not the lunchroom, they know what it feels like. And we will go to great lengths to avoid that feeling, to avoid being like socially standing out in that negative way. And this is connected to the pronouns view because currently, like when you express doubt about the standard view, and the standard view means a woman is anybody who says they're one, and so you need to kind of
That's
wrap your,
that's the standard view now.
that's the standard view. Yes, that's the majority view. And so
So I could walk in your
we,
classroom and say I'm a black lesbian, and
so
what would the reaction be?
well, they would reject that. We'll get there in a moment. So
I'm very interested to hear why. Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
we'll get there. Let me lay this out. So
Sure. Yeah.
um, like the standard view is a woman is anybody who identifies as one, and so you need to be kind and compassionate and respectful by adopting the language they want you to adopt. Okay, that's kind of what they think. And anybody who doubts that, it's kind of like that awkward lunchroom moment where everybody's looking at you
Right.
and they're like, "What you're like you just what a why you should be respectful, man. This is like basic human decency. Come on, dude." And it can feel really, really intimidating if you're the one person who
Yeah.
doesn't see it like everybody else.
They're not worried about the intimidation, whether that's respectful.
Right. I mean, all I'm saying is that it's
It's kind of
it's
like a half-assed concern for respect. It's a concern for respect for me and my side, but not for you and your side.
right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of sloganeering going on, but
Sure.
the point is that it's social conformity. It's a they're not really thinking logically or reasonably. They're just thinking about, how can what do I need to say and what do I need to signal for people to think that I'm a good guy?
Right.
That is a really strong motivator. C.S. Lewis's essay, The Inner Ring, nails this
Hmm.
as, the main motivator in what people say in conversations. Okay. Now, in terms of whether they take this reasoning all the way, like you were saying, walk in and identify as a 6'5" um, black dragon or whatever, as you said.
Well, I said black lesbian.
Yes. Okay. The answer is no. They react really strongly against that. They don't want to take their reasoning to the logical conclusion because there the stakes are higher.
And they're kind. They think they're kind as they do that. How do they
Well, they
maintain?
just think like I was like,
Why do they think they're still kind when they?
well, okay, I brought this up in conversations. Okay, so you guys, you know, gender, woman is anybody who identifies as a woman. So I could identify as a woman, and you would treat me as one. You would call me one. You would use
Right.
words that, all that stuff.
Right.
Now, let's talk about Rachel Dolezal. So if identity is found by looking within, and you consult your inner desires, and you discover your truth, and then you live that out authentically, and then society should accommodate you by acknowledging that with its language. If that's a true and good account of identity, which is what they believe, well, let's think about Rachel Dolezal. White as the day is long, but identifies as black. Thoughts on this? And every time I bring that up, I get a really strong negative reaction. They're like, well, no, that's different because race is biological. And so, I mean, of course, if you read like the gender scholars and the race scholars, they say no.
It's tough because you're doing race at the end and you haven't covered race yet. So the analogy, you can't really use that analogy yet because
Well,
gender's first. You
all
cover
I'm trying
gender
to do,
first.
all I'm trying to do is see if they're going to take their views to its logical conclusion.
Right.
We're talking at the end of the day, we're talking about what does it mean to be a human being? What is identity?
Fine. Okay. Well, let's say that I say I'm a lesbian.
Okay.
Would they have a problem with that?
Um,
And when I look in the mirror, I see a black lesbian, but I am a lesbian.
well,
I'm a man who is attracted to women.
I think they might have, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head here. They would have a problem conceptualizing that. They would say, well, are you identifying as a woman?
Welcome to what it's
So if
like to be
you,
me.
yeah, if you identify as a woman, then yeah, you could be a lesbian. That's what they would say. But
Right.
when it comes to race, that's where they draw the line.
That's interesting.
And they're reasoning is, well, race is biological and gender is not. Gender is, as the saying goes, what's between your ears. It's a social construction, where race is not. You can't choose your race.
But
Well,
I mean, if it's a social construction, then there's no measure about what it is at any given time, and there's no reason for the peer pressure to go either way. I mean, we could just start a social movement the other way tomorrow.
what do you mean?
I mean, if it's socially constructed, then it's just a matter of having enough people on your side. Okay. There's no reason for me to be on any side. I could start a new movement tomorrow with social pressure to go back,
Yeah,
because that's what they think that men and women are, right? It was just social peer pressure, right? Is that what they think? I don't know what I mean, do they even know what men and women have been for the whole of human history, or how
I
do they
I
not
think
have any historical understanding of this?
I think they have a really hard time answering that question with any depth, because number one, their definition is circular.
Right.
Number two,
Totally.
um, we all recognize there's a difference between having a property and identifying as having that property.
Yeah.
Like a robot can identify as a human being and not be one, and somebody
Right.
who is mentally impaired can fail to identify as a human being but still be one.
Sure.
And they just never thought about that before, because
Yeah.
they're so used to thinking in slogans, but not going past that, because
Yeah.
they're trying to manage their reputation, trying to manage their image, their social image. And right now, the
Mm.
view that generates those slogans has the social clout.
Right.
And so a lot of times, because they don't want to, they're terrified of being called a bigot or a racist or a misogynist, or they're terrified of standing out in those ways. They just go along with the slogans, and it doesn't get any, like, there's no questions. There's
Mm.
no questions.
They're not curious.
Yeah, so it's really hard for them to answer the what is a woman
Right.
question with any sort of depth, with any sort of non-circular, non-vague answer. It's either something that's circular, and a woman's anybody who identifies as one, or they resort to stereotypes.
Right. Mm.
So, let's talk about in a woman's bathroom. Somebody like me walks into the woman's bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that I'm a woman versus somebody that's, you know, posing as one? Like, how can you
Mm.
tell the true blues from the posers? It's like, well, you can't ask, because that's bigotry according to their view, and you can't go by the body, because that's
Asking a question is bigotry.
yeah, like I mean, a lot of the policies, like if you walk up to somebody and it's like, hey, do you belong here? Are you really a woman? That's doubting. That's expressing skepticism that they are who they say they are. And so, yeah, that's like, you're not supposed to ask. So you can't ask. You can't go by the body. You can't go by like their physical makeup, because that likewise is bigotry. So what are you left with? You're left with stereotypes. And so eventually, if you really persist in asking that question and getting some sort of answer, they're going to result to some sort of stereotypes, which they all reject. They all think that, like, if we're talking about gender or boys and girls apart from this whole pronouns thing, they're going to roundly reject using stereotypes. But it's just
Right.
here. That's all they got to go on.
Right.
So, yeah, we're trying to, parse these issues out and get them to really think about things.
Yeah. That's the key thing. You mean, well, I don't know why would it come up? What would be the concern about the bathroom?
What do you mean? Concerned about the bathroom?
Well, I mean, why would it be their business to know whether you were a woman in the women's bathroom?
Well,
I mean, why would that be important to know? Do they think it's important to know?
I mean, I yeah,
Okay. They
right.
still do, they still believe that it's important to know that, but then they don't know how to know it, or they pretend not to know how to know it.
Well, I mean, it's not a crazy thing to think that there's a possibility that somebody could be in the women's bathroom and not belong there. That's not a
Well, I
crazy
mean,
thing.
that that's the historic view. But I'm trying to see where the historic view ends and the new view begins. I don't understand why we would have women and men bathrooms at all under their view.
Right.
Why would you segregate the bathroom or
Right.
the locker room?
I mean, that is a kind of where their view ends up.
I mean,
It's
if you want
possible.
privacy, I understand the privacy issue, but locker rooms are not private already.
Hmm.
I mean, you could just go full on private and just have, the changing area is private.
Hmm.
And like individual stall is, there's some measure of privacy. It's not really that private. But I think that the historic reason that we have men and women bathrooms is because it's a half-assed privacy. It's like we want privacy on these lines, but not really beyond that. And it's that's why I call it like a half-assed privacy. And I don't think we've thought about that. I mean, like if we're going to be private, let's just go ahead and have the whole thing private. I mean, it would take more room, it would take more
Yeah.
ingenuity with the engineering, but
See, therein lies the rub.
right. I mean, these so-called gender neutral bathrooms are the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life because all it is a room. It's just a private restroom. That's all it is. You could take the sign off and just say this is where you go to the bathroom.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, you don't. It has nothing to do with male and female. Never did. And maybe I'm the one that in Starbucks waited for the. There was a men's and women's, and I'm talking like 10 years ago or whatever, before they had these crazy gender neutral bathrooms. But they had a men and women, and I would always use the women's because there's nobody else in there. Who cares? I have to pee.
yeah, but that's having that writ large, just period. That's so unfeasible. In some instances, yeah, you can have single use facilities, like at a gas station or something like that. Makes
Right.
sense.
But
But
I don't understand why you
uh,
call it gender neutral. Is my point? Is that
right,
it's just
I,
it's
I
just a
get that.
bathroom. Yeah,
I get that. But
yeah.
at some point along the way, there's going to have to be a public mass restroom, like in a stadium. You can't have single use facilities in a stadium. It's just totally impractical. In a gym, like a 24-hour fitness or something like that, those have to be,
Well, it
you
would
know,
take more. It would take more room. You have to plan ahead for it.
a lot more room. Just
I
the
mean, the
cost would
way.
be
I mean,
impractical.
look at this. If you don't know what a stadium bathroom is in the men's room, it's like a trough, and men go up like horses and pee in it, and that's there's no privacy whatsoever. And the assumption is that the kind of people that would go in there that we call men have the biological capacity to pee standing up. But I mean, a man can use the women's restroom and ask any woman who didn't that he didn't clean up the seat because he peed all over the seat. It's a lot harder for a woman to use the men's restroom because just biologically, and I'm talking historically, the definition, right? The men and women. But I mean, there's a lot of room at the stadium. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, like I brought this up at Pepperdine back in 2015. I saw the writing on the wall there. I mean, I was like, but look at all this room at Pepperdine. They have these vast lawns, these manicured lawns that nobody uses. I mean, there's nobody out there doing anything on these lawns, and it's
You
precious real
you would
estate.
you would replace the lawns with a bathroom?
Well, you wouldn't have to replace the whole thing, but my point is that you make decisions. There's all these tennis courts, and they just sit empty most of the year, and it's in Malibu. That these are very valuable tennis courts. That lawn is an extremely valuable lawn. And if you valued, for example, a library, then you like if you know how libraries throw away books or they give away books, then and you know how they do that, they pick which ones are not getting checked out
Mm-hmm.
over a certain amount of time. So the intellectual vice of the patron of the library, the lack of curiosity, is what dictates which books leave the library, because allegedly there's no room in the library. And my point is that there's tons of room in the what are you talking about? There's tons of room on this campus. It's just that you're making a choice to have grass over there instead of books. That's a choice you're making.
I agree. There's no solutions, only trade-offs.
Yeah, and it's not that there's no room, it's that you made a choice not to have these books there. And I mean, the reason I bring this up is because I find I have to go on eBay to get some of these classic books, and I get them and I pay for them, and they get delivered and they have library stamps on them, discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like Christian, um what was one of the for example, there was an Edward John Carnell book called Christian Orthodoxy, discarded from a Christian college library. And the book is called Christian Orthodoxy, and it's by one of the titans of 1900s Christian theology. He
Mm-hmm.
was a president of Fuller Seminary, and they're just discarding that book. It's not going to be in our library. I mean, I know they probably have an electronic copy of it or something, which drives me nuts. But anyway, I know. I mean, so I mean, if you take your argument against privacy, then just you could integrate the locker room and save room, I guess.
I mean, I agree with your supposition that yeah, there's extra room that could be used for other purposes, namely individual, so like
Let,
solitary bathrooms.
let
But
let's let's get a little bit more explicit. And this is like a family friendly show, but show. I hate the word show, but it's a family friendly podcast, and I have a clean rating, and I like to keep it that way. But I think we have to just be a little bit more clear. And I think the people at Pepperdine were a little bit annoyed by my video from within the men's restroom, which is still public on my Facebook, by the way. I have a video, a live Facebook Live that I did from the inside of the men's restroom. And there was nobody in there at the time I checked. But I wanted to show people the layout and how little privacy there was in the men's locker room. Sorry, at Pepperdine locker room. And I went into the showers. There's nobody in there, but I wanted to show them that the showers have no privacy whatsoever. There's spigots, and
mhm,
all the guys are facing each other as they take the
mhm,
shower. It's so if the goal is, to put it crudely, to that no one sees anybody else's genitals on the campus, to put it as crudely as that, if that's the goal, we don't do that. We don't meet that goal right now, and we never have. And not even in high school. High school locker rooms don't meet that goal either, and these are minors. So,
I
okay. So what are we doing? I mean, do we have that goal or do we not have that goal? I mean, I'm like, maybe I'm artistic, not like a savant, have you
I don't
seen
know,
Rain
man.
Man?
I've
Have you seen
never.
Rain Man?
Yes, I have, and to your question,
I was like Wapner, I mean,
I don't
what
know. I've never really thought about that. But
it seems like
my
that's the worry. I mean, it's the genital issue and that's the worry, the people's private parts.
um,
Uh,
yes, we don't really go there in this class conversation.
well, no,
Uh,
you can't
yeah.
because you can't. That's my point is that you the real conversation you can't have because
Mhm.
first of all, even if it is appropriate because it's not in the classroom with kids and even in college it might be a little tough to have that conversation just because of the way nowadays the way people get really nervous about anything that could possibly be offensive to anybody. But my point is that even among people that should be having conversations like that, I don't see conversations like this, and there's just things that are just taken for granted, and you have to infer by the structure of a building what the assumptions are because people don't just come out and say it, and
Mhm.
we're very uncomfortable, and even the way we refer to these things, like we refer to them as restrooms and bathrooms. There, like there's a bath, someone's taking a bath in there, or like they're just resting. No, I mean, we just have so much, you know, we're so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But
Look, for the record, lest anybody get the wrong idea here, in
let's get this on the
the
record.
classroom when we're having conversation about gender,
Hmm.
our focus is not really on bathrooms at all. The focus is what is a woman? Is the idea that a woman is anybody who identifies as a woman true? They listen to and read some arguments to say yes. They read to and listen to some arguments to say no. They're skeptical of what I've called the standard view, and then we talk about it. And
On
bathrooms,
on on your campus, are there rooms? Are there any doors that have the word women on them on it?
yes,
Okay.
bathrooms do. And
And is
so
it that word woman or is it girl? Is it
I'll
boys
have
and
to look.
girls?
I don't know. I'll have to look. Actually,
Uh,
it's one of those things that I just never really thought to,
it's
you
probably
know.
both actually, because there's a staff,
Yeah,
yeah, staff bathroom.
yeah, there is.
Yeah. I mean, those it's important. A lot of people I think that's where the rubber hits the road is where,
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to push them to not only think critically about the issue for once, rather than use slogans, but also whatever their view is, to be consistent about it, to not weasel out and do a Mott and Bailey when the stakes get high, and
do,
now there's actual consequences to their view.
do they get how do they react with the consistency thing? Do you have
It's
to
hard for them.
argue for that or do they
Yes.
already value consistency?
No. No, they don't. It's 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 one of the main points of the class
Wow.
because um, it's one of the patterns that I've noticed. You know, when we're just kind of talking, and the stakes are low, they'll confidently assert those slogans with like over the top confidence. You know, but then when you take their view, and you turn the temperature up and you start pushing their hot buttons, they'll they'll bail real quick.
Hmm.
And they won't notice the inconsistency.
Hmm.
You know, so
Okay.
the whole conversation we were having earlier about Rachel Dolezal is one of those issues because their view of identity is extremely individualistic.
Hmm.
You know, hey man, you don't get to decide who I am. That's a choice for me and me alone. I'm going to be myself. And what's behind that? Well, identity is found by looking within. It's an individualistic, subjective quest. That is their view. And they apply that with Stalin-like zeal when it comes to gender. But then as soon as you
Right.
take that, you're like, all right, now let's apply this to a parallel circumstance, race, which gender and race are connected. Okay. You read the scholars, gender is a social construct, so is race. Yes, skin color is real. You don't choose your skin color, but the social significance that we have invested in that is a social construct. That is the argument they make. So the two are connected.
Well, how do
Right?
they know what a social construct is?
I talked to him about it. I define it.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they, I mean, they
That's
kind of
not their
intuitively,
word. They don't use that word until
they
you
do
give it to
sometimes.
them. They
Yeah,
do. Okay.
they do sometimes, but just for, clarity's sake, I define it, but they kind
Gotcha.
of already know, like coming into this, what a social construct is. Like even if they don't know how to articulate it, they intuitively grasp what the concept is because, it's like in the air. But anyway,
Mhm.
as soon as you apply it to a parallel circumstance that is rationally connected to gender, they bail because now, the stakes are a lot higher.
Right.
And there's a social stigma attached
Current,
to going all the
currently.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
currently.
currently to going all the way. And so they'll bail on that.
Now,
It's just like with the
how do they know,
relativist.
how do they know that they're on the right track? Like, how do they know they haven't gone far enough? Like there's a new announcement they missed. Like there's even another gender. Do they have anxiety about that? That they're going to miss an
I don't
announcement?
I don't get the question.
Well, um, I guess my question is,
So you're talking about like kind of more outre identities and pronouns and stuff like that?
they seem to feel like they're on the cutting edge of some kind of new discovery, but I'm wondering where they're getting the information about the discovery. I mean, and how do they know the information is up to date?
Well,
It's got all
I,
the information they need right
I'm not
now.
sure. I'm not sure what you're getting at. I'm not sure what you're getting at, but maybe like tell me if I'm understanding you correctly. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Another thing that we talk about is, um, well, if I if my pronouns are she, her, and you got to go along with that to be respectful. And it's, insert whatever slogan you want. Like, it's just a small thing. It's just a courtesy to you. It's just being kind, all the things they say. If that's the case, if I adopt a she, her pronoun, what about neopronouns? Like
What
kind of
about
like
what? Yeah.
what are called neopronouns.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you're more outre, kind of like fey fair, or I don't know. I'm not making this up. I read a New York Times article recently that was talking about pronouns like bun and bun self, and we laugh at that, but that
Sure.
like the New York Times was profiling those pronouns favorably. Like there's a whole list of them. Like there's just you just make them up. So if you have to be respectful by adopting my pronouns when I go by she, her, what about those other neo pronouns? Do you need to also adopt those pronouns if somebody chooses them in order to be respectful? And they really have a hard time with it. Like they draw the line there. They're like, no, because that's not a thing. That's not socially acceptable. It's
Well,
not really.
but that's what I'm wondering is how do they know that it's not socially acceptable?
Well, give it time. Give it time. See, that's
So
kind
it's
of
just
one of
an
the.
impression that they have at the
Yeah.
moment about what's acceptable and what's not, and that's what they base their view on.
I mean, that's kind of one of the liabilities of the progressive view is something that was acceptable today, 5 minutes from now is going to be declared anathema and
Yeah, but
heresy.
declared by who is my question is how do they know
The
what
winds
is
change.
socially acceptable
No, yeah, the
and
winds
whether they're
change.
behind
Nobody.
the curve and whether they're already screwed
Yeah,
on
see,
there?
they They don't know. No, nobody knows who makes the decision. I mean, you're right.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah. Yeah.
does. It's just like the wind changes, and they kind of notice, and they're like, all right,
Yeah.
to be a good person,
Right.
this is what I've got to say now, and so they shift
Yeah.
with that.
Sure.
Yeah, it's social dynamics through and
Yeah.
through,
Okay.
all the way down.
So it's okay.
So currently, uh, they're inconsistent when it comes to a
Well,
man identifying as a
yeah, there's a
woman.
lot.
When it comes to a man identifying as a woman, they're like all in on that. Like, to be respectful, you have to go along. But take the very same view of identity.
Yeah.
Remember, identity is an individual thing to them.
Sure.
You look inside, you declare your truth. Well,
Yeah.
somebody who is going with some, more esoteric pronoun like fey fair, they're doing the very same thing. Well, why don't those
Sure.
slogans work there? Why do you all of a sudden pull up short and say, well, no, that's not a thing. That's not common. That's not socially acceptable. Like, nobody, no, that if I doubt that, if I don't adopt those pronouns, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just not going to go there with you. They pull up short because they know it would be ridiculous. And so they're inconsistent.
They think they know it would be ridiculous. I that's why I'm like wondering is what's the source of authority for what's ridiculous today?
Social dynamics.
Is it something they see on Instagram? It's just a feeling
Mhm.
they get? Okay.
I
Well,
mean, just
yeah, I mean,
inexplicably.
I see what you're saying. It's very slippery. It's interesting. You obviously navigate that quite well. I mean, it's not just the word woman that's changed that they think is changed. I mean, I'm actually wondering, do they even know there's a change that they are advocating for the word? I don't even know if they believe that. Because like when the marriage definition came up and I was, I never shied away from that in class ever. And I would have students say, "Professor, why do you care so much?" And I would be like, "Well, uh,
Yeah,
do
that's
you
another.
think that marriage is this definition?" They would say no, and I would say, "Well, why do you care?
Yeah,
You care, and I care. We both care. It's not an issue of who cares, right?
that's
It's
another thought terminating slogan.
sure,
Like, they
yeah,
don't want to know. They're not really asking you why you care. They don't really want to know
no,
the answer. They're basically saying, and this comes up in my class every semester. There's somebody, multiple people, that stop and turn to the skeptics or the doubters and say, why do you care? That's just a way to say, like, a very nice way of saying, shut up. And you need to get on the bandwagon. It's not really an honest question. So one of the things I do in the class is I try to point that out. It's like, hey man, do you really want to know?
I always point out that um, the fact that it's an issue means that it seems like everybody cares about it.
Yeah, everybody gets to care
Well, I mean,
because
but it's worth caring about. So why would you ask the question of why do you care? I mean, I could
well,
just ask
no,
the same question to you. Why do you care? Why do you care about what? Why do I care? We all care about it for the same reason, and it's because the definition of the term has real world consequences.
exactly,
That's
exactly.
why
You
we
can't
care about the words. That's
you
why we're
can't
fighting about it.
you can't defend women's rights if anybody who wants to be in the category can be in the category.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, you have to define the word before you defend the group. You got to
Sure.
know, in order to combat poverty, you got to know who's poor. If it's just whoever identifies as poor, now you're going to have Donald Trump. Excuse me, I want, I'm broke. I want my benefits. Where are my food stamps? And you're gonna have to give them his benefits if anybody who identifies as poor can be poor. So if you adopt that sort of radically individualistic definition, goodbye to any sort of robust defense of
Right.
women's rights. Yeah, that's why it matters. And everybody gets to care.
Sure.
not just people who identify as transgender,
Well,
not
we all
just people
use
who are on
language.
bandwagon.
Yeah.
Yes,
We,
and
it's
because
more
you know
basic. Yeah.
I'm a father of daughters, so I get to care. Thank you
What
very much.
gender are your daughters?
Daughters, Lucas.
So, okay. But my point was that um, there's a lot more going on here. Well, first of all, there's the issue of there's a desire to change the definition. And that if I can get the marriage people to see that, that I've already, that's a huge win right there.
Mhm.
And they eventually usually do admit that that's exactly what they were trying to do. And I'll tell them that I never felt like I had a right to do that. And so it's not like I'm trying to prevent you from having a right. It's that I feel like I never had that right, and no one has that right to change what's true
Mhm.
about marriage. And you don't have the power, and you don't, and therefore you just don't have the right. But you also don't have the right to do it the way you're doing it, because the definition of marriage is not the only thing at issue. Further back is the manipulation of the word hate. That's actually what was, they were changing that definition.
Mhm.
And hate didn't
Yeah.
just mean disagreement, but it certainly didn't mean fear. And they were using this term phobia as if it was in a totally new way. And I pointed out that the word phobia, the way you're using it is as if it is something to be morally ashamed about, but that's never the way that phobia has been used.
Yeah, man.
It's
Right.
something to inspire compassion. If somebody is genuinely afraid of something, that should inspire compassion and empathy from you, not moral condemnation. And it's just an odd way of talking. And so you're twisting phobia, you're twisting hate, and you're abusing these words. And it's also that you can get a definition change in marriage.
Mhm.
And I knew that there was some other, what's the next word? There's going to be some other word. Because if you're that callous with words, then it's going to be man, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be gender,
Yeah.
it's going to be woman, and who knows what else. And now it's the term respect and kind. I noticed you kept using those terms, respect and kind. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, how do you know what those words mean? And unless you're going by historical practice, how do you know what is really kind and what's respectful? And
Yeah, man.
whether that's
The,
even,
the
how do you know?
more the more I think and the more I, kind of read and listen in on the conversation about
Yeah.
these issues we've been talking about, the more I realize that um, particularly the progressive side just proceeds with so many language word games
Yeah.
and linguistic smuggling.
Right.
And that's how they, get people to a lot of people to go along and jump on their bandwagon is by manipulating words, by
It's
taking a word
manipulation.
like
Yeah.
kindness and investing it with political content,
Sure.
like on the sly, like not telling people what they're doing, but just kind of like,
Right.
smuggling it in
And then
behind people's back.
and then censoring dissent.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
pretending like, oh, you disagree with these politically laden concepts and these politically laden ideas. Well, that means you're unkind.
Shaming
A lot
dissent.
of
Yeah.
a lot of people are really intimidated by that.
Sure.
They don't know how to respond to it, and
Yeah. They're
I think
vulnerable
that
to it.
really
Yeah.
I think that really messes with people's heads a lot. And
Sure.
so the more I listen in on how people talk and the arguments they're making, the more I see that it's just just empty uh, slogans and words all the way down,
Huh.
and
Yeah, that's a
it's
common
funny.
theme you've said over and over again is they just don't think past the little
Yeah,
two
it's
words.
thought terminating cliches.
Yeah, it's like bumper sticker ethics.
Yeah, people kind of hear the word and
Yeah.
heavy emotive connotation of the word does all the work. And it kind of like,
Yeah.
oh man, kindness, that sounds really good. They don't, it's just,
So it's really shallow, in other
yeah,
words. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, God bless you for that work that you're doing. So you're teaching philosophy and you're in, you're teaching Bible. What's your favorite class to teach?
It's the philosophy class by far. Because, you know, the kind of conversations we have and what I've said previously, I think students in order to flourish,
Yeah.
in order to be a good citizen, you need to have that dogmatism thought. You
Mm-hmm.
need to actually sit and put down the slogans for a change and consider the arguments of both sides,
Mm-hmm.
and really rationally weigh them and put truth at the center. What is true?
Yeah.
This idea, what's the best argument behind it? Let's analyze the argument for cogency. And then this other idea that sets itself up as the opposite. What's the best argument for it? And let's examine it for cogency. And then let's have it out. Let's think through this.
Yeah.
That is something that they really, really need. And so on the daily, we get to do that.
Wow.
That's why I
Is
like
it
it.
every day? Does it meet every day?
Mm-hmm. It does. I
Do you
mean,
ever
that's
point, do you ever point out that like on the, and we can move off the pronoun thing here soon, but do you ever point out that there's something else that's new about the pronoun thing? And that is that it's never been, and I wrote this on my Substack, so I'm just drawing from what conversations I've had with students. It seemed to work, at least in college, where I point out that our practice with the third personal pronoun is that we don't ask people, we don't, for input about what we use for the third personal pronoun. You have the first personal, which is I and me. Doesn't seem to be any issue with that. There's the second personal pronoun, which is you, plural or singular, spelled the same way. It's not really an issue either. But if you're not around and I'm talking about you, I I go by, or if you are and you're over there, I go by, first of all, it's rude to refer to someone in the third person when they're there, when they're right there, because you're talking, it can be very rude. Unless you're
can
giving
be, but it's
someone a
not all the time.
compliment to somebody else or something, but
Yeah, I actually don't think so. I don't think it's rude. I think we do this all the
but
time.
my point is that the rule is that it's it's the same thing with using a personal versus impersonal reference. If I'm walking through a space and I see a chair, I don't I don't refer to, I don't address the chair as you. And the reason I don't do that is not because I disrespect the chair, it's because I have a belief that that's not a person. And so therefore that doesn't apply unless I'm being humorous or something like that. Like, how did you get over here? And put the chair back. And same thing with referring in the second person, or an animal or something like that. I just go by what I believe. It's the speaker, what the speaker believes. That's who gets to decide what to say. So if, for example, if I'm talking about, teaching a class and I reference Hitler, I don't say the word he because I'm trying to be respectful to the Nazis. That's never been the rule. That is not ever entered anybody's mind when they use the word he for Julius Caesar or Mao Zedong or whatever. It's just that's my belief that's he appears to be a man. And that's the only reason I use the term he, and I get to decide that. It's up to me, and I make that choice. If he appeared to be a woman, I would use the word she, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And
So
that's still in force. I don't. When did that change, and how did that change?
are you saying that pronouns are public language? They're not
third
individually
personal
chosen?
pronouns. Third
Okay,
personal.
so third person pronouns. Are you saying that they're like communal public words, and they're not things that like the individual gets to quote unquote adopt or choose for themselves? Like you're questioning
Well,
you're
you could
questioning the
maybe,
idea that
but
you're
I might not even talk to that person. So in other words, it's just weird to say, here's how you refer to me when I'm not around. And this is respectful. Well, you don't get to tell me how to refer to you when you're not around. I mean, like, it's like if I was driving by in a yellow car, and I park up and I pull up and I say, just so you know, the colors of my car are red and like a dark maroon. But that's the colors of my car, and that's how I want you to refer to my car when I'm not around. It would just be weird. Be like, well, no, if it appears yellow, I'm going to use the word yellow because that's how it appears to me. I'm not going to change the way I talk.
well, no, I think,
And it's not disrespectful to you. It's just I'm just using language.
I think we use third person pronouns in the presence of the other person all the time. And yeah, that's
Well,
when
he said that already.
Mhm. And I don't think that's rude.
I mean, it sounds weird when I say he when you're right there.
Well, no. Take prayer, right? I'm praying for you, and I'm praying to the Father.
Sure.
After, saying your name 20 million times in the prayer, it sounds really, really awkward. I'm going to have to go with pronouns, right? So that's an instance where you're in my presence and I'm using the third person pronoun, and it's just fine. And there's situations like that all the time. So I don't think it's like when you use the third person pronoun in somebody else's presence, I don't think it's necessarily rude.
No, I didn't say that. I said I see what you're saying, but I said it can be rude. But in any case, it has nothing to do with. It's never had anything to do with. Um, I think usually when we use the third personal pronoun, the person's not there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Like Hitler isn't around anymore, so we use the word. I mean, it has nothing to do with what they tell us.
yeah. Well, okay.
It's not like Hitler said use he and him because that's I want you to be respectful of me.
Look at
I mean, no, that's
here's
not why I use that word.
Lucas. Here's the bottom line. Okay, the bottom line is when it comes. I'm going to say this, and we should probably move off this issue and move on to something different. But when it comes to pronouns, we're not just talking about like meaningless words. We're not talking about how many angels can dance in the head of a pin, like some esoteric philosophical concept. This attaches to the fundamental question of all time. And it's this: what is a human being? What is identity? How is identity formed? These questions that we just kind of take for granted, but if you think about them, they're really, really fundamental and really, really momentous, and they carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about pronouns, at the end of the day, you got to connect it to that. You got to connect it to identity. How is identity formed? Yeah. Is it just something that is this expressively individualistic thing where I look inside and I discover my truth and I got to live that out? Society has to affirm that.
Yeah.
Is that the true, good, and beautiful account of identity? Or should we go with another idea of identity? If you adopt that expressively individualistic view, then there's no reason not to adopt somebody else's pronouns. It's all connected.
Well, what I'm saying is
there's no reason to adopt somebody else's, like if they have some neo pronouns, right?
Right.
It's all logically connected.
Yes. I don't have any pronouns. They're not mine.
Well, yeah,
they're the English language's pronouns.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to say.
They're not mine. Yeah.
That's kind of what I was trying to say earlier.
Yeah,
like it's not like this individually
right.
chosen thing. It's a public language, and so you don't get to you don't get to make that decision for everybody else. That's kind of Camille Paglia is pointing this out. She's like,
Yeah,
it's kind of an arrogant thing
sure.
if you go around
Yeah. It
trying to
is.
dictate, compel that speech to everybody else. Like
Yeah.
it's just really weird if you think about it. So yeah,
Why I make the word like when I was talking about chair, I in the third person I would say it,
mhm,
and that's not that's because it appears to me that's what it is. It's not disrespectful. It's I'm just trying to reflect what I think.
mhm.
And I might be wrong. Maybe the chair is a person. Maybe, maybe God endowed it with personhood and but I just I'm doing the best I can. I don't mean to be disrespectful. And if someone appears to be a human being, I wouldn't use the word it.
Mhm.
Um, because it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate, not because of what was asked of me, but because of what I think is true, what I think the speaker thinks is true. And if we distract language from what the speaker thinks is true, and we shame that, that's the issue I'm having. That's and I think you have the same concern.
Mhm.
And this issue of identity bothers me too, like the word identity. Um,
Well, I think the
well,
word just means what are you?
yeah, the
Who are you?
properties that you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your core essential nature?
Hmm.
You know, so it is a buzzword, but it stands for a question that is
How do you
pretty
handle
meaningful.
race? How do you handle race on in that class?
So a lot of
So,
students, when I tell them that we're going to have a unit on race, they kind of react strangely as like, well, what are we going to talk about? So it's like, well, it's not going to be, well, on one side we've got Martin Luther King, but on the other side we've got uh, Governor Wallace, the segregationists, and we're going to think, we're really going to ponder Governor Wallace's segregationist views. Like, no, we don't. It's not a unit on race in that respect. So there's certain ideas
although I think
about
that would be a valuable thing to do at some point.
no, I'm not going to go there. So our unit on race,
I don't know how you understand history if you can't get inside the minds of people and
okay,
understand from their perspective. But I know it's not a history class, so
yeah.
yeah.
What we do is I take certain ideas that are pretty hegemonic in public discourse, and what I mean by that is dominant. And there are certain ideas about race, and I put those ideas front and center, and then we ask, are these ideas true? Are they helpful? Are they good? And so the ideas are things like, is racism synonymous with disparities? So if you read Ibram Kendi, who's a pretty popular writer on racial issues right now, he says that anytime you see a disparity on racial lines, um, that's caused by racial bias. So that's caused by some sort of systemic racism in the pipeline. So he identifies racism and oppression with the existence of disparities. So, okay, so we're going to talk about that. That's an idea that's very, very popular. So the focus in education right now is on equity. All right. So we talk
Not on academic excellence, but on equity.
right, equity,
Sure.
equality of outcome. Okay. Is that idea identifying oppression with disparities? Is that true? So that's one thing we talk about.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing we talk about is, racism has been redefined lately.
Mhm.
So it used to be,
Here we go
attitudes
again
of
with the words.
attitudes of prejudice, um, kind of thinking that your racial group or your group is superior, based on some sort of biological
Why
characteristic.
did the phobia thing not catch on with the race? I don't understand that. Like if the phobia means hatred, why is there not black phobia or whatever the word would be?
That would be anti-black.
Is that a word they use? The
Mhm.
phobia word?
I mean, it's the same concept, different word, but same concept. If you're anti-black, you have a prejudicial attitude against
Do you,
blacks and in favor of your
do you feel
own
like
race.
people have a fear that they really are racist and they don't know it? Like the kids? And that they're looking for any kind of clue as to whether you're racist or whether they are, and they don't kind of know. They're just kind of swimming in confusion.
I think in society in general, not just students. Um,
Because I
John,
have such a
John,
confidence that I'm not. I have no problem referring to a word because I know that that does not make me a racist. I know that because I know what it is. But I feel like so many people are so nervous because
yeah,
they think that it's very easy to be a racist. And I just
mhm.
wonder, well, what in the world do you believe about people? Jeez.
Yeah. John McWhorter, he's a kind of a liberal writer,
Yeah,
New York
sure.
Times, and he makes this point all the time. You listen to him, says that everybody is scared out of their wits of being called a racist. It's like
Yeah.
we smell like urine all the time. It's the way he puts it because we're just constantly peeing in our pants
Huh.
about this. So yeah, there's a lot of fear. Um,
It's weird.
and it's really hard to, just like with gender, it's really hard to honestly have a conversation about this issue. So it's really, really
It's
difficult
because people
because
are
of that.
so nervous they don't want to talk
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because of that.
They're worried they're going to say the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And then that's like crossing the Rubicon. You can't go back. And the investment with every word is fraught with such eternal significance that you can't have a conversation at all.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then that's bad.
That makes it difficult.
Yeah.
So
How do you make
if that attitude takes root in any sort of conversation, what you got is not a conversation, but you got just
right?
a ritual virtue signal.
Yes,
Everybody's trying to like draw attention to themselves, like, hey, look at me, I'm
I'm
I'm one of the
good.
good guys. You don't got to be worried about me. I'm
I'm a good
I'm not a
person.
danger. Yeah, I'm a good person. I'm not a danger to you.
Hmm.
And so conversations like that are really, really tedious.
Yeah,
They're just
because there's just shaming going on. There's not argument
yeah,
or thought. Yeah,
yeah.
sad. It's inhuman because we're meant to have deeper conversations than just
Hmm.
pretend shaming. So how do you navigate that then with them?
Well, part of it is the I start out the gate trying to create a culture of honesty
Hmm.
where we can feel free to really air our views and not have to worry about being socially shamed. So the first week of class, I start out by setting the stage in that way. It's like, look, you have signed up for a class where everybody, no matter what your convictions are, at some point in time, you are going to be offended. You're going to be angry. That's what you've signed up for. In this class, we are centering the question of what is true. We're not centering these other social dynamics. And so I play a video clip of Van Jones. He's a liberal CNN journalist or commentator, TV anchor. And a number of years ago, he had this brilliant, 4 or 5 minute speech where he was talking about like the ridiculousness of safe spaces. He was like, look, um, this, you have the right to be safe from physical harm or from like an aggressive verbal attack and slur, like you are a inward, like you have the right to be safe from that. But you do not, especially on a college campus or in a philosophy class or whatever, have the right to be safe from ideas that upset you,
Hmm.
that that um, get you angry emotionally. Like this is a mental gym. The whole point of the gym is to lift weights. You're not safe from the weights. I can't. He says, I can't pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots and learn how to deal with adversity, learn how to deal with difficult conversations, learn how to deal with ideas that you don't hold. So in this nation, you get to, you know, you get to, express your beliefs, and other people get to express their beliefs, and you can't bear this. So I play that clip, and that just kind of goes a long way, I think, to kind of like disabusing them of you know making these conversations this way that are stifling. And I think it opens their minds a little bit to um, conversations that are a little more honest, direct, and raw.
Wow.
And just after that, it's just actually following through on that. So we start out with we don't start out with gender. If I started out with that like the first week, it was a minds, right? So we
Yeah.
kind of slowly build up to that. We start out with some issues, some questions that are controversial,
Right.
but the temperature is a little bit lower, and we
Right.
practice. So philosophy of mind. We start out with that question.
Well, hold on. Hold that thought. I got to go to the women's room. Hold on a second. Yeah, I just got done getting out of the little girls' room there. Um, sorry, you were talking about the last thing I have on my notes is Van Jones, and that seems to do the trick, that clip that you play, at least for
Well,
now.
yeah, the first week I try to set up the appropriate approach and attitude and frame for the course.
How long is that clip?
This is 4 or 5 minutes. It's really short.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's
Even
enough
though
for them to
no,
like,
no,
okay,
like after that, you gotta kind of continue and I don't want to say enforce that attitude, but
yeah, or remind them.
apply that in how you actually teach. So we start out with questions and issues and conversations that are they're still controversial, but they're still kind of they're like lower in terms of their heat. So the first issue that we talk about, the first question that we deal with is the mind body problem. All right. And so our first couple of questions are kind of like that, where they're getting practice listening to the arguments of both sides and engaging with them and talking with students who have different views. And then just gradually kind of raise the temperature and get to more controversial issues, where by
Gotcha.
like week 11 or 12, that's when we hit gender. That's when we hit abortion, the ones that are like really, really dicey. I don't
So
want to start with,
you've had a culture of respectful
right,
argument and
right.
engagement up until that
Yeah,
point.
you build a culture, and by that time in the semester, everybody, like, we know each other. We talk with each other almost every day. We're comfortable with each other. There's a lot of trust built, and their their muscles of dealing with differing viewpoints have been strengthened as well. So by that point in time, they're ready to hit some of the more um, hot button issues. Um, so that's that's worked so far. I don't. I really work to try to give both sides an equitable hearing, um, and it's a fun class. So
That sounds fun. So mind body is the metaphysics just traditionally. Do you cover any epistemology?
uh, not like its own unit,
Right.
but kind of
The whole
along the way, epistemological issues do come up.
yeah.
So it comes up when we get to morality, because what justify part of what is kind of behind a relativism is like a naturalist epistemology, like a scientism.
Hmm.
And so we bring that up a little bit when it comes to mind body problem, and then it comes up again the next unit in morality, because it's kind of like it's like behind the scenes. It's like the man behind the curtain, you know. So you got to bring it up front, and you got to say, all right, here's a view that kind of
Yeah.
motivates physicalism. The
Right.
view that you're just a combination of atoms, and there's no soul and no non-physical part to you. something that motivates physicalism is this kind of scientism that restricts knowledge to only what can be given by the hard sciences. And so,
Yes.
yeah, it's not its own unit, but it comes up here and there in like different parts of the course. Yeah, we don't
Do you
really.
do you expose them to views about or to the vocabulary like epistemology, metaphysics?
Again, a little bit along the way.
Okay.
Just kind of like, hey, I need to describe these terms real quickly to
Yeah.
you, find them because in your reading it comes up. So I want you to know what it says in the reading. But
Okay.
I try not to belabor,
Yeah.
spend too much time on the terminology because I want the course to kind of move at a quick pace that keeps them engaged.
So it's not like you have a lecture on those terms and then there's quizzes and they have to know them, and it's
Correct.
on the final too.
I used to, but I jettisoned that to kind of make room for other things.
Oh, okay. Now, what kind of assignments do you have? Do you have a midterm, a final,
Our final is a
quizzes?
party. Our final is a party, Lucas.
Well, why would you not sign up for this class then? I mean, geez,
Yeah, well, that's one
how
of my
many
selling
people are
points.
in? Yeah,
That's one of
sure.
my selling points is when I go to different classes and plug it to students. I say, look, number one, it's a controversial issues class, so kind of the hot button issues that you want to talk about, but maybe you don't get to a whole lot. You get to talk about them. And number two, very little homework. That's a selling point. Um, we go from bell to bell pretty intensely in that 50 minutes, but usually after that, there's not a whole lot for you to do at home, and that's a selling point. Because again, I want to engage and reach your average everyday student. I don't just want to reach the philosophy nerds like you and me. I want for me the more the better. And so I kind of have to you know um, play to their interest a little bit and get some carrots in front of them. And
How
that's
many
one of them.
students do you need to have for the class to go?
About maybe 10 a semester.
Okay. And you're able to get that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you coaching?
Not really. I
Okay.
mean, I volunteer a couple days a week in the wrestling room.
Hmm.
For your audience, I used to be a wrestling coach, but stopped doing that. So I just volunteer. Yeah, I don't do like a coaching in an official capacity.
Are
So
you happy as a teacher?
very, yeah, love my job, man. I didn't always used to say that.
What school do you teach at?
I teach at a school in North Dallas, Texas. So I'll leave it at that. You can probably figure out if you Google me though. Um,
The public school?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I used to not say that with the confidence and passion that I do now. That's one of the reasons why I got out of coaching is because it was just too much. And I was always having to, you know, piss at fires by my feet and deal with drama that was just emotionally draining and very, very frustrating. And so I got out of coaching and I'm
Yeah.
just focusing on teaching right now, being a good instructor in the classroom. And now that I don't have, um, coaching on my shoulders, I can really focus and be good at what I do, I think. And the classes that I teach are really interesting too, and I get to use my gifts in a really direct way, and so that factors into it too. So I think without the philosophy class, I probably wouldn't be into teach. I would still be passionate about teaching, just not into it as much as I am. Because I mean, think about it, Lucas. How many schools actually have a philosophy class? Not
Are-
many.
um,
Not many. I mean, maybe if some private schools do, but in terms of public schools, that's really really rare.
wow.
So I just so happen to get to be in a place where I do that. So I get to my degree is in philosophy, I have a master's
Yeah.
degree in undergrad in philosophy. So I get to use it. I use it in my English classes. I use it in Bible lit. I use it in TV and radio. I use it in teaching. But In the philosophy class, it's like direct.
Right.
Like that's a straight espresso shot of philosophy. So
Yeah.
man, it's like my wheelhouse, right in my alley. So why wouldn't I be passionate about that?
And that's
You know?
1/5 of your teaching load.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other classes are good too. I don't mean to minimize them. The students are I love working with the students that I work with. You know, they're they're interesting. They're engaging.
Yeah.
They keep me young, keep me interested in going to work each day. Um, yeah, I
Do
really
the,
love working with students. Period.
do you ever struggle with hopelessness
And that's a great.
in terms of the institution and the kids?
Yeah, I mean a little bit because, like I was saying earlier, it just kind of sometimes feels like the salmon swimming upstream. You
Yeah.
know, I mean I know there's other teachers of my persuasion in schools. You know, so I'm not saying this to denigrate individual teachers, but the problem isn't really in public education, at least. Problem isn't, um, having good people in the classroom. The problem is the system,
Hmm.
and the system is set up in a really unhealthy way that is not conducive to students flourishing. Um, and I kind of feel sometimes that how can I like to really move the needle in a substantive direction writ large would require some really deep systemic change with the way we do education in this country. And I'm just one guy in the classroom that has absolutely zero power to move that needle. So there's only so much that I can do. And so, yeah, sometimes I do struggle with that. But at the end of the day, I kind of come back to what do I have control over and what don't I have control over? I have control over the culture in my classroom. I have control over um, my ability and effort to engage students in things that are worthy of thinking about in an engagement. I've got control over those sorts of things. And so I just try to focus on that. Because if I focus on like these big systemic issues, you know, I'll probably
Yeah.
be a lot more pessimistic.
Um, well, because of the nature of this podcast, I do want to press in a little bit and offer some hope here
Go
because,
for it, man.
okay, because we are not simply just sitting around looking at our belly buttons here. We are interested in the systemic issue here. And if nothing else, you can bear witness to the fact that the problem is systemic and shine some light on what the problem is. And so and the fact that there is a problem that needs to be solved, you can bear witness to that with some uh, quite authority, I would say. You said it's set up in an unhealthy manner. It's not conducive to the students flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what would need to be changed for it to be more healthy?
Well,
What would be helpful if it was changed next year or in 5 years or whatever, if it was possible? And I'm not asking you to comment about whether it's possible. I'm just saying if it was possible, if you were in charge, or if someone you trusted were in charge, and you were to say this is what needs to change, what would
mm-hmm.
you say?
It's a really good question. Um, Answering that adequately would probably take hours.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just give you a couple of thoughts here.
Okay.
the focus or the center of public education is making students college and career ready. And so basically, we want, like, if you read your average everyday public school mission statement, so most public schools will have some sort of mission statements, like this is the type of student we're trying to produce. This is what we're doing in education. Usually, it has something to do with that college and career readiness and getting them to be successful in a rapidly changing global environment. Okay, and success just means whatever definition the student thinks it means, whatever it means for the student. That's kind of how it works out. And my response is that leaves out so much of what it means to be a flourishing human being.
Yeah.
This is really narrow focus. It's a really pragmatic focus of making sure that you are a good worker, a good employee. And that matters. It's not nothing, but it's just that it's really anemic. And so, the fundamental questions of life kind of go unanswered or unthought about in favor of developing skills that would make you a good employee or a good college student. Now, again, I want to say it's not that we should just jettison that, but it's just that's like the focus at the expense of everything else, and so it's just out of balance.
Yeah,
I think a classical model is a little bit more holistic. Classical model, if you Google Dorothy Sayers and you read her essay, The Lost Tools of Learning, she outlines what is the classical model of education. And I just found
what's it called again?
Dorothy Sayers' essay, the Lost Tools of Learning.
Okay.
Probably one of the best places that defines what classical education is. It's not just a focus on like Greece and Rome or the classics, it's that, but it's so much more. But to kind of give a short answer to your question, I think the classical model is much more well-rounded in its approach to developing a human being over time. It's takes some of the things that a public education is going to not focus on, and it's going to bring them back into education. So education is about discipling a human being, forming what C.S. Lewis called not just your intellect, not just your appetites, but your chest, your center of moral reasoning. Bringing that vision, that C.S. Lewis, that Dorothy Sayers vision back into education and putting that front and center. I think that's what's needed. Now, I don't know if that's possible, given the way our culture works and given the way that the public system is set up. But if you want well-rounded citizens that are human in a full sense, you're going to have to bring, some sort of classical model and put that front and center in your education. I just don't know if that's, again, I just don't know if that's possible with the way that public education is set up otherwise. I don't think you can have some sort of classical model, because that connects to worldview, that connects to religion. And you're not going to be able to, I don't know. I don't think we're going to be able to pull that off. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
Okay. All right. So that's a lot to chew on.
Another thing, can I riff for a little bit longer?
Of course.
I think we need to acknowledge that public education is not neutral. See, the thought is that, well, public education is public, it's the public square. Therefore, it should be secular. And secular is equated with being neutral in terms of religion, theology, and worldview. But the way that it works out in actuality, there's nothing could be further from the truth. Public education is secular, and that is not neutral. that is just as particular, that is just as parochial and just as sectarian as, an evangelical private school. It's just there's different ideas about what the good life is that are
Yeah.
put front and center in that education. And we need to acknowledge that, but it's not acknowledged. We kind of run this dog and pony show, this charade that
Yes.
in public education, well, we're neutral when we're not. We are
No,
teaching,
definitely
whether
not.
implicitly or explicitly, we're teaching students all sorts of ideas
Yes.
about what it means to live a good life, about what the purpose of life is, about what is right and wrong, what is a human being, like all these worldview questions. We're teaching students uh, very particular views and answers on those questions. We are not neutral,
Sure.
public schools.
Yeah.
And it's just that's kind of like the
Whether self-defense with a gun is moral.
yeah. I mean that's the secret that dare not say its name, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can say that and acknowledge that, but we need to.
Wow.
That's the way
That's
it is.
pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you about stuff?
Um,
Or do you want to hold off on that?
no, it's fine. I'm open to talk. I have a separate kind of ministry that I do on my own time outside of the classroom. I work with churches and a lot of youth organizations. The organization's name is the Daniel Collaborative because I'm collaborating with parents, collaborating with youth workers in the endeavor of making students, in their youth group and in their churches, like Daniel. So I think we could use more Daniels in the world. So that's why I've called it the Daniel Collaborative. A number of things I do with that organization, mostly centered around helping prepare Christian kids for faithfulness in long term. One of the problems that we're facing in the church is a lot of our students graduate high school and then they get out in the world, whether in college or in military, and they work and they walk away. And I don't think that's because of Christianity itself. I don't think it's because the Christian faith has been tried and found wanting. I think it's because we just don't prepare our students very well with how we approach discipleship in the church and in the family. So, I'm trying to just help out and work with kids and students with that. And then also with parents. I'm a parent myself, and this is really close to my heart. Want to work with parents and churches and trying to help build, better models of discipleship
Mhm.
in the home that will hopefully, again, comes back to preparing kids for being faithful adults in the world. The goal is to, whether I'm working with a church or a youth group or, parents or whatever, the goal is to um, help those who are involved in students and kids' lives disciple their kids so that they're faithful long term.
Hmm. And how do they get a hold of you?
My website is danielcollaborative.com. My email is info@danielcollaborative.com. When you get on my website, you'll see there's, a couple particular things that I do. One of them is a role play, which is pretty fun. So I'll go to a group. Sometimes that's a group of parents. Sometimes that's a group of adults. Sometimes it's, it's a mix. Sometimes it's kids. Sometimes it's college kids, whatever. And I'll actually role play as an atheist or something.
Yeah.
And we'll have a conversation back and forth where, I'll challenge them. They'll challenge me, and we'll have a conversation as if I was an atheist. And then we debrief, kind of go back through the conversations, like, all right, what stumped you? What questions came up? What are some issues? And yeah, that's my website. And then sometimes that leads into like more trainings, like it's kind of the spearhead of an actual course in apologetics or theology or philosophy. That's probably the main thing that I do. And then others is I try to talk to parents and youth pastors and sharing stories that I've encountered in the classroom to kind of help adults who work with students and who are in kids' lives understand what students face in their lives, what they're facing on social media, what they're facing in the classroom, in the hope that those stories that I tell both motivate and inform the adult's future discipleship. So,
Gotcha.
last thing that I
Cool.
do is I have an actual course that's geared for adults, but it can be adapted for students as well. And it's called Understanding the Times. And so basically, it takes, it's like a 5 or 6 week course, go through some controversial issues. It's kind of like basically adapting my philosophy class to a church environment.
Okay.
It's a fun class.
And that curriculum, did you come up with it?
Mhm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So essentially,
There's a book called Understanding the Times. It's developed by Summit Ministries. Same title.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Maybe I got to
Yeah.
change the title of the course.
It's a thick book. It's a pretty thick book. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be accused of stealing their title, so maybe I'll change the name of the course or something like that. But I mean the premise of it is it's really kind of a fun course. So we'll start the class where I'll play some sort of video, like YouTube video, about a conversation online where this controversial issue came up, and usually there's a progressive or a secular person in the conversation or in the debate, and then we'll just ask like, all right, if you were in that conversation, or if somebody says this to you at a restaurant or wherever you're at
Right.
your job, how would you respond to this? And so then we use that premise of that question to kind of work through the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really engaging, really fun course. The times that I've taught it, gotten a lot of good responses from it. So it's good stuff.
Wow.
In
You
my
got
humble
a
yet always correct opinion.
nice little blog here.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your experience and your wisdom.
Appreciate you having me, man. It's always fun.
Yeah. It's always good to see you.
You too, man.
And
Keep fighting the good fight, Lucas.
well, you know, I'm kind of like you, Rich. I think the systemic issues I'm seeing are so um, profound. Not sure really where to go from here, but all I can do is put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
And
Eat that elephant one bite at a time.
that's right. All right, buddy.
Hey, it's been fun. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.